So today I'm going to talk about chapter 8 and I will explain as I did for the previous chapters of the book Nano Brain, the making of an artificial brain made of a time crystal. Here and there are 18 figures and I will describe nearly 70 different panels. Each panel is a figure. So nearly 70 figures are there in this particular chapter, compiled into 18 figure numbers. And I will describe about fourth circuit element, Hindakter. The name Hindakter came because when we said Leon Chua, who first proposed that there should be a fourth circuit element, uh, um, and mankind should be looking for fourth circuit element because other three circuit elements were discovered in 1850s, 1860s. For 150 years, people were trying to find a fourth circuit element, and we believe that uh, the 2008 claim on that memristor is a fourth circuit element is wrong. And then I have a strong differences with those who are working on memristors as fourth circuit element. Memristor is as itself fine because my PhD topic was pinch of voltage. And I think that in 1962 and 64, Opshinsky first showed that on-off switch, memory switching beyond a threshold, there is the semiconductor material actually conductivity jumps to a higher state, and if you pass through 0, 0, it goes in a higher conducting state, and beyond the threshold bias, it goes down and follows an insulator. So insulator and conducting state are two conducting states of these biastable switching devices. And then in 1974, after 12 years of Opshinsky switch, there were many switches in between, and this kind of current voltage characteristics, Leon Chua assigned them as fourth circuit element memristor. And why we are completely against it, because it's a semiconductor like structure, there is no helical current flow, and then there is no magnetic flux that is generated. They say that rate of change of magnetic flux induces an electromagnetic field, EMF. So instead of magnetic flux, if we take EMF, and if we let the current flow, then it will be V equal to IR, almost something like that. Irony is the fourth circuit element, if you look at figure 8.1a, there is a chart, and then you will see that resistance comes because V equal to IR, voltage is equal to current multiplied by resistance. Q equal to CV, stored charge in a capacitor is equal to voltage across that device and multiplied with capacitance. Similarly, psi equal to Li, magnetic flux produced by a device, by a helical conductor, is proportional to the current flowing through the through it, and then the inductance of the system. If you take the product of the two, then you get the magnetic flux produced. Now you will see that current, voltage, stored charge, they all occur twice, except stored charge and magnetic flux. So then there should be an element that will correlate stored charge in a device and the magnetic flux produced by it. And the memristor flows current, so it doesn't store. Even if it stores charge, it relies on current transmission. So basically it goes to when it stores charge, it goes to higher conducting state. Then all the stored charges are gone, and it comes to lower conducting state. So actually, it is accumulation and releasing of charge. So just like a capacitor. And then in a higher conducting state, this resistance is very low, and it is just like a normal switch. So I thought that discovery claim of memristor by Stanley Williams and other groups from is wrong. It is incorrect because the true fourth circuit element should store charge like a capacitor, and even though stored charge does not flow any current, magnetic flux would be tuned. So you will change the degree of charge, stored charge, and more and more and more in a linear fashion, and then magnetic flux would produce more and more in a linear fashion. But if you take the stored charge and magnetic flux, you take the ratio of the two, then you will find that um, it is equal to mLT to the power minus 2, that is similar to the dimension of resistance. So in one sense, dimension-wise, Leon Chua is right, and Stanley Williams and everybody who are working, thousands of people working on memory star is right, that it is if dimension of two quantities are same, physicists say that both are same. But here we would say that the physical situation is very different, and you can't do it always in physics. So this is where we differ strongly with those who claim memory star as the fourth circuit element. Moreover, in 1974 paper, Chua himself wrote that all the using capacitor, inductor, and resistor, you can recreate memory star. So memory star is not a fundamental device. That was accepted by the proposer himself. So those who think that it is a new element, memory star would be a new element, is not right. So when we invented this new device, this inductor inspired by microtubule and DNA and other kind of helical structures, biological structures, which are extremely insulated. So if there is no chance that they flow current, so they can store charge, more and more charge they can accumulate because they have electron acceptor groups, plenty of them. So you can linearly increase the stored charge in these biological structures like DNA, RNA, mm, mm, um, many filaments and microtubules, actin, whatever, and then many spirals are there. Even around the neuron, the glial cells, they remain assembled like a spiral. So so spiral assembly is kind of fundamental to the biological structures, and we can find it everywhere. But the beauty is that we can store charge. Because there is a helical structure. If the electric field flows, noise is pumped in, they automatically get quantized, because if it's a circular flow, then even if you pass noise through a circular path, it will become a ordered signal. So noise becomes ordered signal if you pass through a ordered path. That is kind of a fundamental truth. And then what happens is, mm, uh, if electric field comes, and then due to asymmetry of the geometry, electric field and magnetic field, they experience differently, because electric field always try to propagate in a linear path, and then magnetic field try to propagate in a circular path. So the geometry is favorable to the magnetic flux. Then it will happen is that magnetic field and the electric field will get separated, and then you get magnetic flux and electric flux, or magnetic vortices or electrical vortices. Magnetic vortices will have magnetic flux. You can measure it separately than the electrical vortices. So so what could happen is you store charge and you generate magnetic flux, more and more magnetic flux. So that was kind of a philosophy. 2008 I came out, and then I started finding which material should be there, and that was my journey. So I found a Nature paper published in 2008 as a hoax. I wrote the editor in chief, the then editor, physical sciences editor, that it is a very wrong paper. It is very bad for the development of science. But editor-in-chief, editor, now he is editor-in-chief of Nature, Carl Jimenez. He just ignored my letter, and then he said those who are interested in the story of memory star would be interested in such things. So so I think that it's very painful letter, very painful, and very non-scientific, illogical and immoral letter. And there was no chance for me. So I try to find that would there be any material in nature that is really the four circuit element, stored charge, and more and more charge is stored, magnetic flux is generated. Figure 8.1a, you see that I have written the Maxwell's laws. Why Maxwell's law are important? Maxwell's law suggests that if charge is stored, you see the Gauss law, charge density is there. So charge is stored, then you can produce electric field, fine, but not the magnetic field. To flow the magnetic field, you need to rotate the charge. So basically, in the biological system, or wherever we want to realize the true four circuit element, we cannot flow current anytime. If we flow them and then the flux generates, then it is an inductor, because inductor charge flows and then magnetic flux is generated. So charge you under any circumstances you cannot flow. Then what we can do? We can create a small box and we can rotate the charge. So if the charge rotates, magnetic flux is generated. If magnetic flux is generated by rotating the charge, and we put more and more charges and allow them to rotate, okay, and we can have an electromagnetic frequency and we can tune how many of them we want to rotate, and then uh, we pump out we shine electromagnetic light, and due to the geometry of arrangement of the charge, more and more magnetic flux is produced as we store more charge. But it doesn't matter that sometimes we have to use higher frequencies, sometimes lower frequencies, sometimes medium range frequencies to store different quantity of charge. Okay, as far as applied frequency AC signal is concerned, suppose I have a pane, and then in this pane this is a spiral pane like thing, and then we are shining light, and then light is going through. Then we need to convert, but the problem is that if current does not flow, then Maxwell's law will be validated. So if we want to survive, if we want to keep the Maxwell's law intact, then what we can do, we can rotate the charge, and then we can shine light and split it into magnetic and electrical vortices, and magnetic flux is generated. So magnetic flux, amount of magnetic flux, or number of vortices in the magnetic vortices, if we can increase, and then what we can do is, or intensity increases, or topological charge we increase, then larger and larger area. So the magnetic vortex could be this size ring, and then magnetic vortex could be larger and larger and larger. So it will contain larger topological charge as a vortex, but larger magnetic flux also. Creating magnetic vortex by splitting the electromagnetic field was proposed in 1984 by J.F. Uh, um, uh, uh, he showed it on light itself, and then they demonstrated it experimentally, but on a completely different system, different scenarios, how free magnetic structures could be created from electromagnetic field. But but that work was kind of lost, and then I had to bring that back. And then I started working 2008 and 2010. I worked very sincerely and filed a patent, US patent, European patent, and then Japanese patent everywhere, because I knew that this is the one of the century's biggest hoax, this memristor as a fourth circuit element. And I knew that I have hit the jackpot, and I have understood how it works. And I was not very desperate to or keen to publish my discovery. I went on filing patent, and then all the results are now compiled in this book. The reason, and some of the conference papers are there regarding the side products. But I wanted the world to discover naturally that memristor is never the fourth circuit element. Unfortunately, nobody has pointed it out that it is totally a hoax, and then thousands and thousands of papers are published on memristor. It's so many faculties got a job because they work on memristor. So many memristor based brain building projects are going on all over the world, but it is just a resistance. It is just a switch, same switch. There is no novelty in it, nothing in it. But the device that we are proposing here can change the world forever. It can bring the synthesis. So fourth circuit element inductor. So when we contacted Leon Chaudhary, he said that your device is a new kind of fourth circuit element, you can say. So you give it a new name. Don't put memristor. So okay, we will put a new name, and that's why we put inductor. The reason is that it is the synthesis of artificial atoms. And artificial atoms, when they interact, or the optical vortices, when they interact, then interference or singularity is created. When singularity is created, you can use that singularity as a glue, and phase relationship is also there. It is just like an architecture of confusion. If you want to synthesize the kind of device, the spiral insulators where stored charge could be stored in different positions, that appears to be the most fundamental device for synthesis of for replicating the architecture of confusion naturally in a system. And that's why we felt that this device is fundamental to if we want to reverse engineer the human brain and consciousness. because the circuit that we want to build should be created by this. And when we synthesize artificial atoms, I have a device, and then I don't need to connect this device with any other thing. It will automatically go. So for an example, figure 8.1c, what we have explained is normally you have a charged dipole, positive, and there must be somewhere the negative part of it. But we talk about a circular loop vortex. Okay, it could be electrical vortex, it could be magnetic vortex, because it could be electromagnetic vortex, or it could be other fund, but it should have some magnetic element in it. Why magnetic element? Because if it has a magnetic element, then you can you can increase the quantity of flux linearly, and that is one of the key factors. So so we went on that there should be Kirchhoff's law in normal circuits, normal electronics. But when we talk about these circles, these vortices and self-assembly of vortices, each vortex is like an atom. Okay, because it can move independently, it can interact, it can do all the things that atom can do. So that's why it is called artificial atoms. And how do you assemble it? Just the way you see number 2 of the table, figure 8.1c, then you see that you can create tiny spheres made of these magnetic loops by interference, or you can have magnetic loop, and then in the singularity region you can have another loop, in the singularity region you can have another loop, and then you can build on by self-assembly. So basically you do not need to amplify current, you do not need to do anything. This topological structures arrangement of this vortices is enough. And that's why you don't need any circuit or circuit law. So series or parallel circuiting is fundamental in electronics. But here, spiral of spiral of spiral, or vortex of vortex of vortex, or topology, geometric shape, and then in the singularity region or the corner of the geometric shape, you put some more geometric shape, and then in the corner of geometric shape, you put more geometric shape. That kind of features would be more important. So that's why you understand the era of electronics we are suggesting should be over, and era of magnonics would come in, where we will put different topologies one inside another to build the architecture. And the fourth point that you see in this table is that if electric charge rotates around a path, then magnetic vortex is created. But here, if you take a magnetic vortex and you rotate it, then you will see the phase diagram of electric field like this. So it starts from a point, it rotates around a sphere, and then it ends in a point. So it looks like a charge. So it appears topologically like a charge. It appears like a new object, 3D object. And so what you can think of is, if there is B, magnetic flux there, and then a charge moves through, then you see that electric field is generated. And similarly, if a magnetic field is there and vortices come, then you will find the summation of psi I of the magnetic flux is 0, because all of them are actually integrating into a topology. So we have created those topology, many such topologies there, and we will now make a journey on how do you realize this. So let's go to figure 8.2 and look at figure 8.2a. So what happens is, in molecule, is that if an electromagnetic field you put in, pump in, then it has been shown nearly 50 years back that molecule doesn't have any boundary. So what happens is the mechanical vibration of the boundary in the external side of the molecule, large molecule, vibrates very fast, but inside the molecule is very, very slow, because of the electromagnetic thing. And if the membrane oscillates very, very violently, and then internal system very slowly, then there is a huge time domain gap between the two. So what happens is you will find it's an adiabatic system, and that has a lot of advantages, many advantages, but you understand this very well. And this particular feature has been used by physicists to realize many different things. For an example, some people started realizing quantum phenomenon in room temperature just by vibrating the membrane very largely. So what happens if it is very fast and then internal system is very slow? So internal system is a host clock and the external system is a guest clock. Now, if what I said in chapter 4, that if you find there is a host clock and then the guest clock pixel is smaller than this circle, then it will go to other world. And if it goes to the other world or below the pixel, then what happens? It is quantum. So how to realize quantum in geometric musical language? Take a circle and it is made of pixels, and then you go inside the pixel. So that's all that you have to do. So that's why figure 8.2 is extremely important for physicists, and you will find top level physicists in the molecular science, those who understand the origin of quantum properties in molecule very well, they always use this 8.2a as the fundamental technology. So if you want to use it, you can look at the related papers associated with figure 8.2a. Now figure 8.2b. Now what happens is we arrange a spiral path. Okay, in the spiral path, if the external layer, there is external layer, there is middle layer, and then core. So 3 concentric layers. Imagine that is there. How did we get the idea that we should have 3 imaginary layers? So we found we were looking at the rigorous mathematical treatment by JF Nye in 1984 paper. And then when we are looking into that, we found that he needs to interfere twice. And then when he was interfering, the signals were differed by phase. And then when we looked at the geometry that he required, he was doing a completely different work. Please understand, in a completely different scenario, he was artificially trying to generate magnetic free particle-like structures independent of the electromagnetic field. And then he was doing whatever was necessary to the cylindrical flow of electromagnetic field flow and something. And then we had to build an imaginary device. So what we did is we created a concentric layer, 3 concentric layer. And then why 3 concentric layer? The middle one would be the synthesizer, and the top one and the bottom cylinders, the top cylinder and the internal core cylinder, both will be perturbator. So they will add the perturbation. So 2 different kind of perturbations are necessary. One perturbation actually changes the shape. It creates very critical condition in which you can convert. So say top cylinder layer and then the middle cylinder layer, they too can create critical situations. And then the middle cylinder layer and then central cylinder layer, it can create a critical situation of the electromagnetic field through interference. But when both these critical waves come together and then they interact, then they produce, they could easily come up to a condition where circular rings of magnetic field could be generated from the system. So that's why 3 concentric layers, and on the surface of 3 concentric layers, so actually figure 8.2c, we find that that small loops or cells are there, and on those cells the current flows. So you can the equivalent system of that would be M1 psi1, that is the magnetic moment, and then the flux that is generated, or the vector that is generated. So so this is kind of one of the fundamental physics of the device that we are proposing as an inductor. Now we come to figure 8.2d. So what happens inside that loop? Inside that loop, what happens is the lattice is there, and then many cells are there, and then say 4 lattice points are there, and then electric field, if comes in, electric field will be horizontal to the surface and magnetic field will be vertical. So only those, they will take part in the synthesis of the magnetic vortex, others won't. So we can change the angle a little bit, or sometimes it can harvest noise, and from there also. So noise harvesting is more favorable to this 4 circuit element that we are proposing in inductor. Why? Because since 2010, in all our publications and patents, we have mentioned it very clearly because if noise, then all kind of directions are there. So it's very easy for the device to naturally capture the electric field propagating along the surface and then magnetic field on the on vertically. Otherwise, you imagine if you have a cylinder and you are pumping electric field from one direction, very small region of the surface you can modify uh, as as the perfect region where electric field will be vertical. But if you have electric field would be horizontal and magnetic field would be vertical to the surface. But if you apply noise, then most part of the noise which are horizontal will be absorbed, and other signals will move away. So you have a geometry that actually accepts the perfect perfect signal from the noise that it considers as a signal. So figure 8.2D is beautiful in the sense that electric field greater than magnetic field comes in, and then magnetic flux greater than E is produced. But this is JF9's result. Basic core idea was JF9, but he didn't take material or anything else. We took material. So matter wave interaction is our credit. So that part we included, but it is not it is not that big deal. The big deal was the radical idea that we would have three concentrating layers, and then charge will be stored. It will be perfect insulators. So from the era of superconductivity, we are proposing an era of super non-conductivity. So figure 8.2e. So you may say that there is an ion flow in the biological systems. Ion flow would be there. Don't worry about it. We are talking about electromagnetic field. So ion flow resonates at kilohertz frequency, so millisecond domain. So millisecond domain is a different physics that is so well studied in biology that we do not want to go into that in this particular book and the kind of technology we are proposing. We are proposing that you don't have to ignore that millisecond domain that has been studied, or ionic biology or molecular biology. In addition to that, you have to go below many layers, and many independent mechanisms are there. You need to integrate all of them and go into the topology of the vibrational space and the symmetry of those vibrations, and finally the prime density related to those topologies. So this is what we are suggesting. Figure 8.2e is a paraxial system. What is paraxial system? So when you have electric field and the electric field of the system and the electric field imparted are very close, and then what happens is a part of the electric field is actually and actually gives makes a contribution to the magnetic flux when it rotates. So that is kind of the very simple presentation of the paraxial system. So you get a vertical contribution. Normally you don't get it, but electric field when it rotates, it gives away a particular factor. That formula we have written here. So there is a contribution because of the local loops in the lattice loop that you are generating. Now come to figure 8.3 A. You find now I was telling that as soon as if you have a cylinder and then many lattice points are those which stores charge, which has the ability to store charge, and some of them will store due to different electromagnetic frequencies. Multiple waveforms will be created, they will interfere, and then they will create a pattern of high density and low density regions, and then thus the trap or the electrical charge will be created, and on those electrical charge will be stored. So that's why using frequency wirelessly you can manipulate this device. So this device need not to be touched by any circuit or any input system. You can use pure microwave or other kind of signals just to pump in and then store the charge. Where those charge will come. Actually, if you are never supplying electrons, how do you increase more charges in the system? That's a very simple and very cute question. So I often, in the last 10 years, many people ask me, okay, so if you are not supplying any electron to this particular device, how could you store more charge? It is impossible. Actually, there are enormous amount of electrons. For example, microtubule, even if it is an insulator or nearly a semiconductor, I mean, it's nearly an insulator, but little conductivity is there. And I mean, if you pump electromagnetic wave, magnetically resonant from 400 gigaohm resistance come down to tens of mega ohm. So it comes down. So what happens is um, um, what comes next is um, uh, when you resonate at a particular frequencies, and then um, how many higher density regions that will be created. Depending on that, there will be delocalization and localization to this particular point. So basically, what you do is redistribution of the high density regions or low charge density regions on the cylinder. So that is what is your objective, and you can easily do it. So lots of electronic density, electron density, high electron density is there on the surface of the microtubule or any protein or any other kind of cylinders, or nearly insulating materials. You don't have to worry about it. But with frequency, when you create large density of states, localized points, or low density of localized points. So that depends on the frequency. So what happens is, lots of electrons from other locations, they come and store at a very particular point, and then particular point. So those high density points we consider as the stored charge density. Okay, and when suppose nothing happens, it's homogeneously distributed, then we consider it as a zero. So whenever we store charge homogeneously distributed, it's zero, and then localized to 5.6 points, it's little, and then more and more and more and more. So that's how we say that we are storing charge without supplying anything from outside. So it is not amount of it's not the amount of charge. It is the redistribution of charge. So that is what is explained in figure 8.3 A, that you dislocate when you have this lattice. Another thing that you need to do is to dislocate a little bit. So you take the circle and twist a little bit. Have you seen the beautiful images of looking on the top of DNA beautifully? Microtubule also look like that. So actually what happens is, after creating the microtubule, there is a twist, and this twist is very very important. If there is no twist, you cannot realize the inductor like fourth circuit element. Why? Because you need to divide two coherent sources, and then just like in a BBO crystal, the quantum synthesizers, quantum wave synthesizers, photon down conversion, and then they try to create the entangled photons. Similarly, they have two transmission lines of laser light. One is along the optical axis and the extraordinary. So O ray and E ray, they call it. Similarly, in microtubule DNA and everywhere, you will find that it is twist in the spiral. So in the fourth circuit element, also we have put a twist in the spiral, so that the two different kind of coherent waves, so we create. So that is explained in figure 8.3a. Now, what happens when you have two different pathways transmitting this kind of signals? Then what happens is um, some of the pathways are selected by O ray, some of the pathways are selected by E ray, and there is a energy gap, subtle energy gap, and that remains as avoided crossing. Avoided crossing you can put in Google, and you can find many places in physics they use it. And what happens is, in figure C, we are describing that if you have different topology, it could be circular, it could be pentagonal. So cylinder, instead, it should not always be circular. It could be pentagonal, it could be triangular, or many different kind of geometries. And then you can create many different kind of avoided crossings and composition of avoided crossings. And by doing that, you can store charge in many different ways. In normally, charge storage in a capacitor is a blind storage. It's like on a sack you put many dust particles. Here it is not like that. Here you distribute charge in a topology. So basically you can encode large amount of topological information as a distribution of charge in this kind of system, not just deforming the shape of the cylinders, also deforming the composition of avoided crossing. So how many different kind of symmetries you can shift the lattice a little bit, and you can do it. So you can look at our scientific reports paper in way back in 2006. Then they used to publish good papers. Now You know what I mean. So that time we published in scientific reports, and then the paper is about. There's a video. There are two videos. You can see the how the lattice is changing, and how it looks like. So figure 8.3e, 3D is that when you have symmetry and energy, and you will see that two different kind of um, potential minima is there. So due to the O ray and E ray, or two different kind of systems facing each other with an avoided crossing, and they will shift with respect to each other. That is called artificial atom. I repeat, when you have two kind of systems, dynamic systems superimposed on each other quantum mechanically, you see, it's quantum mechanically. It's part of single molecular system, single vibrating system. But because two different kind of energy rays are propagating simultaneously, there's an energy gap in between, which is the avoided crossing. And when they relatively move against each other, it acts as a molecule. So that is how artificial molecule term came about. So we have not changed the definition. So this definition of figure 8.3D is, well, the classical definition that you will find in standard physics books. And so we go to figure 8.4. So this is 8.4A is the commercial device, how it would look like. It has many layers of insulators on top, and then bottom water layer, top water layer, and then cylinder in between. Figure 8.4B is I have explained that there will be three concentric cylindrical surfaces. Figure 8.4G is the same. C actually shows the deformation, lattice deformation, because you give it a twist. And then how different vectors would orient in different directions are described in D, E, and F. If you are interested in mathematics, which is described in the book, you can, if you want to understand those mathematics and those vectors which are mentioned in the descriptions, you have to come here and look into it. So, so there is a inner spiral, that is the left side, figure 8.4D. Okay, so left side is inner spiral, and outside external spiral is the other side. So ZZ dash is the central axis. So cylinder is like this, and then you cut one side of the cylinder. Okay, so this is the whole cylinder. You cut this part, and then you get three layers. This three layer is actually put in figure D. Okay, so in the central part, black big line that you are seeing is actually the spiral that is going through the protein spiral in microtubule, you can say. The left part is the left water layer, the outer part is outer water layer. And then you find figure 8.4F, where you find that it is generating two layers are there, which are generating interacting with each other. And when the interaction is such that they manipulate the electromagnetic field in two different ways, electric field in one way and magnetic field another way, you get the vortex-like ring. So how that mathematics is described in figure 8.4F. And now we come to figure 8.5. In 8.5, we have brought in the same plot from chapter 2. Chapter 2, you remember that we say that we have horizontally we have the initial phase and the final phase, and the phase changes, and then phase comes back to the original point. Same plot is here, but the meaning is a little different. How when it is coming back, based on that, actually you create a distribution of charge. So Fresnel's diffraction pattern, how it is changing because of the charge distribution, is shown in figure 8.5b. So basically, by distributing the charge density distribution, you can change the whole light pattern that is coming up. So it is very well known and very, very common. So, how the Hamiltonian of this system would look like? I have already explained all the terms in figure 1.2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So 8.5 is the summary. 8.5D is the summary. So all those expressions are written here. So H1 plus H2 plus H3 plus H4 plus H5. So different terms. And so what are the physical thing? If you have a zigzag path, then you find one part of the energy of this device comes from there. Due to anisotropy, electric and magnetic vectors isolate, and they are treated very differently. So that is number 2. Then 12 different singularities on the Fermi surface. So basically, basically when many different kind of this kind of vortices come together, they self-assemble, and then there are singularity points. So the fate sphere is created by this four circuit element, a topology like systems. So that is actually number 3 of the Hamiltonian. Then localization of magnetic ring. So that comes because two different kind of energy flow is there. Two different kind of dynamics are actually oppositely following with each other. So there is a localization, and then topology regulating the polarization. So when there are 3 layers, so 2 different kind of interference patterns actually interact with each other again. So first layer, so top layer, middle layer interfere and create one waveform. Middle layer, central layer interfere, create another waveform. Those 2 interfered waveforms then again interfere, and then create the third one, this kind of geometric topologies of magnetic vortices. So after we got the Hamiltonian, then we plot the Hamiltonian and how do they look like as a function of time, and then we have explained it here, and 4 Hamiltonian birds, and then how they behave, and and, uh, and so it is beautiful that that it has a dodecahedron topology. Again, dodecahedron, you see. Dodecahedron you find everywhere. We came to invent four circuit element, and then again we find dodecahedron phase space, and that we found experimentally, whether you believe it or not. Really, we changed the length, pitch, and diameters, and then we plotted the phase space, and we found that there are 12. And then the most beautiful thing, this dodecahedron, all the corners, they have a hole. They have a hole. So 12 holes are there. And then if you change the geometric condition a little bit, some of the holes get closed, some of the holes open. So how many ways you can do that? Many, 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 right? So how much information you can write? Can you imagine using just one dodecahedron? And how to do that? Inductor is the best example for that. And how the independent structures are created are actually shown in figure 6C. My mother has called, and then I have to take it. মা আমি একটু পরে কথা বলছি, আমি একটা মিটিং এ। জাস্ট 5 মিনিট, হ্যাঁ আমি শেষ করে নিই। হ্যাঁ আচ্ছা আচ্ছা, I will talk to her just a little later. Let me finish this. So in Hamiltonian, I told you that if you reach the extreme conditions, then you get free structures, just JF9 produced, suggested. So with this Hamiltonian, we directly created that one. So JF9's work in 1984 was about only the waveform and then artificial perturbation. But here we have created matter-wave interaction, and from that actually we regenerated these particles. And then we come to figure 8.7. In 8.7, we have summarized the unique properties that you are getting because of the four circuit element. And what is that? First, you get birefringence. So what is birefringence? So you send one light, ORA and ERA division is there. And then these 2 waveforms that are generated, quantum angle and entangled. And microtubule generates that. It's proved way back in 1990s. So microtubule spontaneously generate quantum coherent signals. You believe it or not, and this is there for 30 years. And then quantum and classical beating of signal means avoided crossing. So 2 different potential surfaces I showed that with respect to generalized coordinate, we find that potentials oscillate, and then they interact with each other, and interact with each other. So that is artificial atom. And then when interact with each other, how do they interact? They basically, the potential surfaces are very close to each other. Frequencies are also very close to each other. So a new frequency, delta omega, omega 1 minus omega 2. If omega 1 is this potential surface, another omega 2 is that potential surface, the difference between the 2 is actually how they oscillate. So we created we took capacitors, many capacitors, rolled onto this, and then we pumped noise into it. And we saw the video that when you pump noise at a particular signal, then what happens? These charges in the capacitors, they could be due to the thermal noise, they oscillate. So this is very different from the inductor four circuit element. You must notice it. But this is just like a toy-like model for kids to play. So they need to take a noise source, and pump noise at a suitable bias. And when you pump noise suitable bias, you will find that magnetic flux is generated on top of the surface in the figure 8.7c. And we took the live video of then the thermal wave is propagating in a very wavy form throughout the system. So we are pumping electromagnetic noise through the system. We are triggering those capacitors. So the pumping signal, the electromagnetic noise that will provide, you have to choose capacitors when you are creating capacitors. You solder line by line, and you coil it like when you build transistors. So young kids can reproduce that. But only thing that for this experiment you need to keep in mind that you choose the signal, noise signal, frequency range such that the capacitors are activated. So when the capacitors are activated and they start charging and discharging randomly, thermal wave is generated. And that thermal wave is actually you can read, and then magnetic field also you can read. So what happens is applying different kind of frequency region, you can store different amount of charge, and then you can generate a different magnetic field. So this was the kind of a first realization of fourth circuit element. Then we go to figure 8.8. Once we created that, we put multiple electromagnetic multiple this coils, magnetic coils side by side, and then we checked with a magnetic film how the magnetic field patterns are actually generated, and then they change. And we the figure 8.8f is very important. It's on a single microtubule, and what we did is we took microtubules of different length, and then this flux period we plotted. So differential charge that is generated on the microtubule surface, and the corresponding magnetic flux we measured with a sensor. So we put a differential sensor and a magnetic sensor on a coaxial probe, very sharp needle with two atomically precise probes side by side. And then we took the differential signal, and it is Thomas oscillation, equivalent to Thomas oscillation. Thomas oscillation is very important because Thomas oscillation actually was the first Liu Esaki created. Esaki died, he got the Nobel Prize for that. But this is a magnetic version of the Thomas oscillation. So nobody predicted it theoretically. I just wanted, I was very fond of Thomas oscillation because that historical story which led to the invention of Esaki diode and many other fundamental studies in the 1950s, 1960s. That story as a physics student actually inspired me a lot, and I wanted to have, because I believe that we have invented a completely new kind of phenomenon where stored charge generate magnetic flux with the magnetic vortices and with these kind of devices. And definitely I would be alive or not, I don't know, but this kind of devices would dominate industry and wipe out electronics. Because you don't need to build any circuit, you can reorient the circuit in different ways, and then this kind of artificial molecules, and the molecules will go each other, interact, and synthesize supramolecular structures, artificial supramolecular structures. Those vortices will rearrange in a 3D pattern and create 3D geometry of singularity points, and then you can do information processing. So this was kind of a fun thing that we did. Several students did that, so I liked it. Now figure 8.9, why it is important? Because this plot, length variation, and this is done on a single microtubule. So length variation, pitch variation, diameter variation, and we measured the capacitance variation. And then using that on a microtubule, we try to find out what are the universal phase relationship that actually converts. So quantum capacitance, quantum conductance. So what happens? Suppose you have a big capacitor, which is a classical capacitor, and then classical capacitor. Inside that you have another capacitor. Now what happens is, just like in a single molecule is a quantum device, right? And why it is quantum? Because the external boundary doesn't exist. So when you apply energy, external boundary actually vibrates very fast compared to the internal one. So there is a huge time gap of oscillations. So then you artificially create the adiabatic system. Similarly, the concept of quantum capacitance and quantum inductance came in the 1984 and 1989. And what was 87 and 1989? That time, what is that big inductor you take, and then inside that another inductor. This inductor means opposite phase, right? Signal that goes and comes to opposite phase. So it sends signal when you have big capacitor and smaller capacitor, and then you send signal in the reverse direction. The signal comes this direction, signal goes out in the same direction. Then it is inductor property, right? So from outside external circuit, you cannot differentiate whether you are measuring an inductor or a capacitor, right? So then it's quantum induction. Why quantum? Because another big shield is there, and inside that, when you have this kind of very thin capacitors, then you can see the similar to the adiabatic system is created. So that's a very conventional way. Physicists historically used many different kind of things. One is this Aharonov-Bohm interference pattern they created with single molecule, treating it as an adiabatic system. So our external system vibrates very fast and internal very little. And then quantum capacitance and quantum inductance like features were demonstrated in creating capacitor inside a small capacitor inside a big capacitor, small, and then you put the dopant in such a way that it reflects back. So what happens is is you get like a quantum capacitance feature, quantum inductance within room temperature. Okay, so we found similar thing in microtubules, and then you go to figure 8.10. In figure 8.10, you will find that there are lots of 3D plots. You don't need to understand. Actually, the length variation, pitch variation, and the others you saw 9A, B, C. That 9A, B, C is actually varied universally with many devices and many conditions. And then that we replotted here in figure 8.10. Okay. So 8.11, in figure 8.11, we find that 8.11a, we find a chart, resistor, capacitor, inductor, and inductance. So, origin, charge-wise, energy-wise, how they would be different, and how we can calculate if we follow the symmetry one by one, as if that resistor, capacitor, inductor should be nearly similar to age. We should see figure 8.10a is that 11a, figure 8.11a is a chart, but ideally what age should be, and now you have understood that it's a different, totally different game. So 8.11b actually shows that that by deforming, if you have an adiabatic system, or if you have a quantum capacitor, quantum inductor, what essentially you are going to have is boundary is very different, very vulnerable boundary than the internal structure. But that boundary is actually reflecting the signal back. So what happens, effective wavelength could be much larger or much smaller. So I have a resonator, cavity resonator like this, and then it can have waveform just like a flute. This is a classical system. But if the boundary is vibrating, then the effective wavelength could be much longer. So in a 1 nanometer waveform, if you can manipulate the vibrations, smaller the device size you go, better is your control. And then if you go some very fast and the internal one very slow, by manipulating the oscillation difference of your boundary and internal material, you can generate 1 nanometer wavelength. Instead of 1 nanometer wavelength, it could be 1 millimeter, 1 centimeter, or even 100 meters, even 1 kilometers, or 500 meters of waveform. So that means megahertz signals you can generate in a small cavity. So that is dependent on this vibration. So there are many PRL papers on different kind of systems. Only thing is that for the first time we studied it with respect to the biological system, microtubule and others, and then we measured how the magnetic flux actually generates. So figure 8.11f is we measure the electromagnetic density distribution and magnetic density distribution on the surface of microtubule. So what happens is 8.11e, you will find that and as we increase the resonance frequency, the quasi-charge that is actually oscillating in the microtubule is so heavy that that it makes with resonance frequencies, only at resonance frequencies. Don't go to other frequency which is not resonating with the microtubule, then you can get it in the port circuit element or inductor. If you resonate with if you do not resonate with the inductor structures, then there is no profit actually at the resonance frequencies. Only if you do the measurement and you try to find out the quasi charge, what is its effective mass and mm, and uh, and and omega sigma, then you find MPR is constant, the angular momentum that is generated by that quasi charge, and that is constant. Actually means the vortex that will be produced will be imparted and an additional angular momentum, just like light comes and light goes, and then an angular momentum is added. So optical tweezer and other things are generated. Similarly, when we split it with the store with respect to the stored charge, then what we will find is its angular momentum is also quantized. So that quantization is shown in 8.11e. In 8.12, actually we explain the same old thing in a refreshed manner. So it is a summary. 8.12 is a summary. So what happens is you will find that two extreme interfered signals come in 8.12a and come in, and then they create B, a magnetic vortex. So 8.12b, what we said is linear propagation, then it becomes an oscillatory one. After first interference, after second interference, it becomes a spiral. And just bottom to that is a triangular wave, and then you see that waveform interfering, and then at the corner you will see circle, 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 circle. So it's a waveform. 8.12c is actually electromagnetic wave comes, it splits into two, and then it goes again from the top cylinder to the middle cylinder. It splits into two. Middle cylinder to the bottommost cylinder is again splits into two, and then another two waveforms are generated. So in this way, you will find circle, 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 circle. So what happens is delta z dash, you will see the formula 2 pi by k cos theta by k3 dash. Actually, when it splits, then you can get a depending on the twisting and lattice parameter, you can find a particular typical condition when you can get a clockwise rotating magnetic vortex or optical vortex, or anti-clockwise rotating optical vortex or magnetic vortex. And then this kind of typical situations are summarized in figure D, and then you can create super coil. So what happens is you generate a phase sphere in E, figure 8.12e. Actually, a whole event is summarized. So noise comes in. Noise has its own phase space when it interacts with the system, and then that creates first interference, and the blue balls create the gray white balls, and then they create the yellow balls. When two systems interact due to avoided crossings, we actually find that that a magnetic flux is separated and it's generated. Then we come to experimental realization. 8.13a is the optical setup, and 8.13b is the real device where we did the measurement, and we created many different kind of topologies. And 8.14 is the summary of the experimental results, where I have told it many times already in the last 13 figures. So you have a lattice on the surface of the cylinder, and then you store charge in many different ways, and then you create knots of darkness. Knots of darkness means due to the interference, there is some region where intensity is very low. The electric intensity is very low, then magnetic intensity is very high, and compared to the electric intensity. And in those regions, knots of darkness is for electric, but they have bright lines for magnetic. And then there are a list of the equations that we have used in this whole dimension is summarized in figure 8.14b, 8.14b. So here, the first chart that you see is how time crystal is created. So when you apply noise until a certain limit or frequency certain limit, there is a perturbation, and then perturbation it comes back to the original point. Similar kind of phase diagram you can generate also for the fourth circuit element when it is generating the vortex. So it's just like synthesis of time crystals in a proper, or tuning of the time crystals, just like applying noise. So figure 15. So the chapter. Figure 15 comes, and in the figure 15 we see that four circuit element inductor. Its application would be growing time crystal synthesis of many different kind of time crystals, artificial molecules, artificial supramolecular systems, and its design could be you have to start from quantum well and traps and then spiral and then rotate and then three layers. You already know that. And then operation would be you need noise or other kind of perturbation, or you can directly impart some geometric shapes, oscillation of topological assembly of vortices you can pump, or you can pump electromagnetic signals of various different kinds, noise especially, but some topological relationship is there in the input. It's very feels very comfortable. This is 8.15. 8.16 talks about the novelty. So what are the novel things here? So the parameters that we have used is delaying. So when charge passes through, it gets delayed and then it rotates on the lattice on the surface of a cylinder, or the ratio of the flux produced by the orient things. Mm, and um, and then you find that psi 0 is equal to hc sec delta. That is also comes from the topology. So the lattice, the way they arrange and then they break their lattice symmetry due to the application of electromagnetic field or due to the resonance, and redistribute charge due to the transformation of the lattice or the conformational changes. So electromechanical oscillations, that relationship actually comes hc delta. That is there in the parameter section of figure 8.116. So you will find that it is doing the delta is the spiral twist. So that twist actually plays a very fundamental role in the four circuit element. And then tau 0, that is topological asymmetry. That is 2 pi delta E by AC sec delta. So sec delta is kind of comes everywhere. so the twist. So lattice structure, hexagonal close packing or a square. If it is hexagonal close packing, in microtubule we have seen in some conditions it appears like square lattice, sometimes pentagonal lattice, or sometimes many different kind of things. So this kind of features actually are quite important in governing the four circuit element. So three layers, lattice symmetry, twisting, and of course they should store charge. They should have the ability to store charge, and the layers should be molecularly thin, the three concentric layers, because they should interfere. So now we come to figure 8.17. In figure 8.17, we have compared the current voltage paradigm that was existing for 150 years, and if we come to charge flux paradigm, the thing that was there was current was fundamental, the current flow, but here magnetic flux, flux ring is fundamental. Voltage was kind of the potential driver. Here charge is the potential driver. The value of H in current voltage paradigm would be infinity. H is the inductance. We defined a parameter, and we have H expression of H also. H is the inductance, and they use memristor M. M is basically R resistors, and then you can say that current voltage paradigm is actually the memristor paradigm, and then charge flux paradigm is actually the inductor paradigm. So I have side by side told how should be. So conductance and time delay of charge when it is passing through different lattice points is capacitance, but here density of states would be the capacitance. So basically the symmetry breaking property of the material that is constituting the cylinder and lattice of the cylinders, and then the lattice itself, electron density distribution, and its breaking of symmetry and its correlation with the resonance frequencies, how it is generating the electromagnetic frequency mechanical oscillations that is governing, that is playing in a very complex way in creating the pattern of density of states. That is actually important. Straightforward quantum capacitance, quantum inductance, in formulations you cannot apply. We have not derived those expressions here because those will be extremely complicated and divert our attention in this particular book. And energy is Q psi, and power is psi square Q, and so this is the table you can go through 8.17 and 8.18 is actually memristor and inductor. What are the differences? So by the time you know that inductor is totally from the different world where old electronic system vortex around the defect spin lattice or look alike of a monopole can be used as an RT. Dark lines are neglected. Dark lines or electric field is important. Earlier, how much conducting a material is, that was the kind of key, and how much non-conducting but topologically rich is the key here. How many symmetries can break, how many symmetries the lattice structure can break on a cylinder or a trilayer concentric cylinder is the ability, how good is the device. So it's a topology synthesizer made of singularity points and then phase space manipulator. And then artificial atom, artificial supramolecular synthesis is the key. And then how reoriented one respect to each other, that is the key. So figure 8.18 is the last figure. And that's how we end this particular chapter. I will come back with the chapter 9 tutorial. And if you have any questions, then please put it in the YouTube channel, and I'll be very happy to answer.